co-founder and dean of the Entrepreneurs Organization Leadership Academy, international chairman emeritus of L3, a leadership organization. Warren, thank you for taking the time to be part of another Special Fathers Network Dad's Virtual Conference.
David, thank you very much for inviting me. I love this. I'm always glad to come back and talk about this subject because it's so important to me and to everyone. And so I'm looking forward to our time together today.
You and your wife, Carson, have been married for 57 years and are the proud grandparents of 19 and parents of 7 children, ages 32 to 52, including a son with special needs. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Well, I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up poor on an isolated farm near the Canadian border in sort of northwestern Minnesota on the Red River Valley. And my dad was a farmer, and we eked out an existence. We had very little indoor electricity, no indoor plumbing. It gets pretty cold in the wintertime when you're going to the outhouse. This is not a good thing. And so it was a very trying and challenging time. We grew what we ate. We didn't have a lot of money to go into town. The nearest village was 3 miles away, 150 people. So we were relatively isolated in that respect, but learned a lot on the farm. I was the only son. I was always with my dad. He was a very hardworking man and learned a lot from him. When I was 12, my dad had been successful enough at farming to head out to move to California, where I became a surfer and played a little basketball, and then was offered an opportunity to play college ball at the University of Arizona, which I took and had a fun time there. Met my soon-to-be bride when I was a freshman at the University of Arizona, fell in love with her. Asked her out 53 consecutive weeks before she would concede that she would go out with me. So I knew right away that she was special. It took her a long time to figure out there was anything special about me. And so we ended up getting married when we were juniors at the University of Arizona and started our life together. And we decided we wanted to have 15 children. And we thought that was a good number because it was the number on my uniform. And it was also my IQ, she said. So it worked out really nicely. So we started out to have children and realized by the time we were 26 years old, our doctors told us that it was biologically impossible for the two of us to have kids. So we thought, well, we'll adopt. We got licensed by the state of Arizona, ready to adopt. Met a young doctor who moved to our community who had spent time with fertility and other kinds of reproduction issues, and put us both in the hospital, checked us out. And in that process, did some tinkering, about the plumbing with my wife or whatever it was, the technical terms. I don't know what it was. And 30 days after she was out of the hospital, she was pregnant with our first child. And for the next 14 years, we had a child every 2 years. So we were blessed to have children. We love them. And our second son is a special needs son, and Scott, a terrific young kid and a great heart and a wonderful member of our family. But as all fathers know who are involved with special needs children, we have to spend some additional time and additional thought around what's best for that child. And so we had that occasion to do that. And it's meant a lot to us in our family and our lives.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And before we go on to talk about special needs, I'd like to just go back a little bit because there's a couple many interesting aspects of your story and growing up. But one of the sort of seminal stories I remember was your dad asking you what you were going to do when you're coming off the graduation stage and scrawling a couple of things on a piece of paper. And I'm wondering if you can share that story with our listeners.
Thank you for asking, Dave. My dad was very goal focused and goal oriented. He needed to be that way because of how he was raised on the farm and the work that has to be done on the farm. So after my high school graduation day, I was a commencement speaker for our high school class. And as I walked down off the stage, ready to go have a good time and party and see my girlfriend or whatever it was, my dad stood there with a pad of paper. And he said, well, you had a pretty good high school career. And now what are you going to do in college? And I said, well, Dad, I got to get going here. We got to have some fun. And he said, no, what are you going to do in college? And he said it with that voice that we all know from our fathers and our mothers that we need to respond. And so I rattled off 5 quick things, right? I want to be student body president. I want to be an All-American basketball player, Phi Beta Kappa, Rhodes Scholar, and the most outstanding graduate in my class. So he wrote them all down. And he said, he put a date on it. And then he said, why don't you just sign right here? And so I signed it. And I didn't think much more about it. Although in the back of my mind, I knew I'd probably see that piece of paper again. Well, if we fast forward 4 years, I was on the commencement stage, graduating from the University of Arizona. And when I walked off the stage, there was my dad. And he pulled out this piece of paper. And I recognized it right away at the 5 things that I said I was going to do. And then he drew a line down of the side of the paper. And on one side of the paper, he wrote success. And on the other side, he wrote failure. And he said, let's see how you did with the goals you had set. And so, were you student body president? Yes, he checked success. Were you an All-American basketball player? Yes, success. Were you Phi Beta Kappa? I said, well, Dad, I had that one semester that wasn't great, but I had good grade average. And he said, were you Phi Beta Kappa? I said, no. Were you a Rhodes Scholar? And I said, well, I was competing to be a Rhodes Scholar, but at that time you couldn't be married and be a Rhodes Scholar. And so Carson and I decided to get married instead. And so I stepped away from the competition. He said, were you a Rhodes Scholar? And I said, no. And he marked failure again. Were you the outstanding graduate in your class? I said, yes. So he said, of the 5 things you were capable of doing, you only did 3 of them. And that's all he said. And that was a very telling and lasting memory for me, right? He passed away not too long after that. But this notion of living to our potential, living to our capabilities is really an important notion. And I think we have to give that a lot of thought as we live our lives, right? You're challenged by running. You're going to run in a 100-mile race a week from Saturday, right? I admire you so much for that. You're going to push your capacity as an athlete to do that. You're going to tap into that potential. I think each of us has to do that in different ways. And my dad was just reminding me that, son, you could have done all of these things. You have the capability to do them all. You chose not to do them. And it left me with a very good legacy, I think, and a very good memory of my father about how I needed to push myself to be my best all the time.
Well, thanks for sharing. And one more story before we go on. I don't remember where it was, but you jotted down 100 things you wanted to do, during the rest of your life. And you were able to accomplish, if I recall, 98 of them. And there were 2 that were left undone, and they might not happen. And I'm wondering if you can reflect on what was the idea behind creating that list and how did it transpire?
Yeah, I was taking a philosophy class when I was 19 years old at the University of Arizona. And I was just reading through some things, and I came across something that struck me as important, and that is you should write down those things that you hope to achieve in your lifetime. And I was just struck by that unusually, and so I decided I would do that. And so I sat down, and over the next couple of days, I created a list of 100 things that I plan to do in my life. Now, some were soft and squishy, like any 19-year-old is going to write probably, and some of them were pretty grand. And so every week, once a week, I would read that list. And what happens when we read our goals to ourselves, we tend to achieve them. We tend to realize what we're all about, as opposed to putting them in the drawer and forgetting them. And so I read that list. And as my life evolved, I continued to check things off that list. And so I got to 98. And I think there are 2 things, as you said, that I probably will never achieve. One is I want to visit every country that's recognized by the United Nations, but it's a little bit of a moving target because countries divide and things happen and new names come out and so forth. But I have traveled to 198 countries at this time, and I plan to continue to travel with my family. So we'll keep doing that. The second thing was that I probably won't ever accomplish. Well, I want to be president of the United States. I think if I'd have run in 2016, maybe I could have gotten elected, because we proved we'd elect almost anybody at that point in time to be president. But I think it's this notion that having big goals, really helps out. And some of them were just interesting. I had a grandson who was in here in my office 2 days ago reading those goals. And he was surprised by them as well, because some of them he couldn't imagine. And others of them he seemed so small and incidental, right? But the notion was that we need to have goals. We need to be targeting something. We need to have our Mount Everest to which we are climbing all the time. And that was very helpful. And I think that was instigated by my dad, right? And I think, when I was coming out of high school, and I think the impetus was a particular class I took, but it's worked pretty well for me. So it's been helpful. I was making good progress on the first list. So about 20 years ago, I made a second list of 100, and I'm about 50 through that at the present time. So keep trucking. I got another 25 or 30 years. I got to keep going.
Yeah, well, it's so inspiring. And I think of it as a bucket list. I think that there's something in there for everybody, right? Message about
I think so
not
too.
just thinking about things, but writing them down, reflecting on them periodically, like you suggested, and being intentional, right?
Yes.
When I think of Warren Rustand, I think of the word intentionality. And just to emphasize, what is your connection? What was Scott's diagnosis?
Well, we had a situation where my wife was 9 months pregnant. She was due any day. She was shopping. And while she was checking out of the grocery store, her placentia ruptured. And as you know, or any parent knows, you have to get the baby out as quickly as possible because there's a lack of oxygen, right? And unfortunately, the ambulance was delayed a bit and so forth. She finally got to the hospital. And so part of Scott's brain was deprived of oxygen, needed to sort and sift through social relationships and friendships and all the kind of socialization processes that we have. And so he was deprived of that. And as a result, it's difficult to connecting with people and making long-term friendships and that sort of thing. And so he was bullied a bit at school. Fortunately, he had lots of brothers and sisters around him that protected him, but he was bullied a bit at school, and school was hard and difficult for him. And it just, our family learned so much from that birth and from him being in our family. He's such a special boy. He's such an outstanding man. And if he were to walk into this conversation right now, you wouldn't be able to tell that was the case because he's learned all these compensating skills. He's developed tools, right? He's learned to present himself in a way that's best for him. But it's just been wonderful to see his growth and development. But a strong family support was necessary for him to achieve that. And I don't know who learned more in the process, Scott or the rest of us, because we all learned how to be more tender, how to be softer, how to have patience, right? How to be more loving. And it was just such an important, and we're so grateful for that, which happened in our family, right? And Scott is just, he's one of the absolutely best human beings on the face of the earth. And we love him so much. But I think for all of us dads who deal with circumstances in our families, not of our choosing, but things that require us to be at our best. I'm often reminded of the quote that says, you have to do your best when the situation is worst. And sometimes we have to call upon very deep resources in us to be that father that is so necessary for our son or daughter at a point in time. And I'm hopeful that I did. Certainly my wife did, others around Scott did. And it allowed Scott to have a full and great life that under other circumstances or in other families he may not have had. So we feel blessed to have had Scott in our lives and to have him in our lives.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Very powerful. And I wish we had more time to talk about that and the way it shaped you. But I would just direct our audience, those present and those listening afterwards, to the episodes number 142 and 143, because we took a lot deeper dive into your family history and some of the experiences that you and Carson have had raising your family. And it's life-altering in a positive way. So with the few minutes that we have remaining, I'd like to talk about your book, The Leader Within Us, Mindset, Principles, and Tools for a Life by Design. And came out about 1.5 years ago. And I know that you have a number of values statements and vision statements. I'm wondering if you can summarize for our audience what the essence of the book is.
Well, I think all of us as dads, I think the position of father in a family, like a mother, I think we're co-CEOs of our family. I think we're leaders in the family. And I think we have to exercise that leadership every day to be successful and for our children to be successful. And so I wanted to write a book about all the things that I have learned and practiced as a CEO, as a father, as a community leader, to try to help others think about what they might do even better than they're doing it currently. And so I think there are 3 great principles of leadership. The first is the notion that we have to have clarity of vision. We have to know where we're going. Every great leader I've associated with, politicians when I was in the White House, when I was in the military, generals and others, celebrities, corporate leaders, they have a pretty clear view of where they're going with their life and what they're trying to achieve. And I think that's really true and powerful for all of us. We have to have clarity of vision. The second great principle is certainty of intent. You mentioned intentionality early. I believe intentionality is critical. When tied to action, we can accomplish almost anything. The purity of our intentions coupled with a strong plan to act, I think allows us to do those things that are most important in our lives. And the third is the power of values, is the notion that how we live our life and the non-negotiables in our life really matter, right? Who we are deep down within us, that reserve that we call upon, the resilience that we have when we're faced with adversity or toughness or challenge. And those values have to see us through the most difficult and challenging times, as they did me with when I found out about Scott's situation, and then learning to adapt and adjust to help Scott the best way I could. I think we have to have those values, and they are non-negotiable. I'm going to live my life this way. This is who I am, and I'm not going to cross the line. And that makes us consistent and powerful as leaders. If we can emulate the very values that we believe in and model that for other people, then I think we have a chance to help others do the same. So those three principles, clarity of vision, certainty of intent, and the power of values, are the three fundamental principles I believe that every great leader has to have and does have that I've associated.
Warren, thanks again. And thanks for all those who attended the session on family leadership.
Gratefulness to you for running 100 miles a week from Saturday. You're going to do great. Congratulations ahead of time.
Yeah, thanks again for your kind words. Be well.
Thank you.